My name is Steve Zeltzer. I'm with the United Front Committee for a Labor Party, and also I do a labor show called Work Week, which is on KPOO. And I wanted to welcome you all here today for this rally against a fascist effort, fascist coup and insurrection at the Capitol. And we take this very seriously, deadly seriously, because the people who did this and organized this want to have a fascist state, a dictatorship. They want the Confederacy. The reason there were Confederate flags there is they believe in that. They believe in racism, they believe in segregation, and they are attacking not just people in Washington, they're attacking people all over this country. Blacks, Latino people have been murdered by the police. There's an escalation of terrorism against blacks and Latinos. And this effort was also conspired with by the police. The police knew about it. And they are observing all social media. They knew that they were planning to go and invade the Capitol. What did they do? What did they do? And we learned this morning that there were police in Oakland, at the Oakland Police Department, who were supporting this insurrection. Now imagine that right here in California, in Oakland, there were people who were supporting an insurrection at the Capitol. That is the rise of fascism in this country. It's a great danger. And we believe that there has to be a united front of working class people and unions and others against this rise of fascism. We have to unite millions of people against the rise of fascism. And the other thing that is important to understand is, where was Nancy Pelosi, who was the leader of the Congress? Didn't she know that they were coming? I mean, Trump said that they were coming to the Capitol. He was 40, 50,000 people were being brought to the Capitol. How could you not know that you yourself would be under threat? So when she blames the police in the Capitol for this, no, it's not just the police. She had a responsibility to protect the Capitol. She's in charge of the police at the Capitol. So you have to ask, why didn't she do anything? Are these people in such a dream world that they don't know that the people who came there are there for action? To do things, to stop the election, to stop the counting? That was another question that has to be raised. We cannot count on the Democrats to protect democracy in this country. The Democrats never have and never will protect democracy. Working people, the unions have to organize to protect democracy. We have to unite all working people. And we need to rally the labor movement politically for a united front against fascism. We have to organize defense guards. When blacks and Latinos are being openly attacked by these Proud Boys and other organizations, we have to stand up and fight to defend them and make sure that these fascists don't come to San Francisco, these fascists don't come to Oakland, and where they are, the fascists are actually in Oakland supporting the insurrection. We don't come, they're there. So the other thing is, one of the reasons that Trump got the support he did was because he appealed to people who have been hurt economically. He appealed to people who've lost their jobs. He appealed to people who've been deindustrialized because of export of factories to China, to Mexico, around the world. But the export of jobs is not just the Democrats, it's the Republicans as well. NAFTA was passed by Clinton. Was passed by the Democrats. NAFTA, which affected millions of people who lost their jobs in this country. Who was it passed by? The Democrats and the Republicans. They both passed it. And the UFCLP agreement, this new quote-unquote NAFTA on steroids, was again not only passed by the Democrats and Republicans, but was passed by the union leadership. The AFL-CIO leadership actually endorsed USMCA. Now, what was UMCA? UMCA was for privatization in Mexico, was for the sell-off of Mexico, recolonization of Mexico. That was what USMCA is about. It was the enslavement of Mexico. And on the border of Mexico, you have maquiladoras, you have the Driscoll workers who work for $7 a day in slave labor in Mexico, right on the border of California. That is done by U.S. corporations, a California-based corporation using slave labor on the border of Mexico. So what we're talking about is an international struggle. And we're here to say the problem is not the Chinese, the problem is not the Russians, the problem is right here in this country. Yeah. It's right here in this country. They would like people to look at other countries for the problems. How can the United States tell other countries to solve their problems and have democracy when this country is supporting coups around the world? We supported a coup in Chile. We supported $6 billion in Ukraine to overturn the Ukrainian government. We are supporting coups, and in this country, when we talk about insurrection and coups, they should know about them because they organize them around the world. So don't be surprised. In fact, the CIA and the FBI, with our money, are engaged in coups around the world. And we have to say that this rise of fascism, the fascist solution, is no solution. Because the fact of the matter is, in California, when we have billionaires in Silicon Valley, we have the pandemic which has made these people richer. What has happened to people in California? People are not even getting paid their unemployment because of the corruption of the unemployment agency. Can you imagine that? In the midst of the pandemic, they can't pay people unemployment because of the corruption of these agencies. And Gavin Newsom has known for years that the unemployment system is corrupt and bankrupt. What have they done? And I want to talk, before we get to the other speakers, about health and safety in this pandemic. Because the fact of the matter is, in California, Gavin Newsom had put a freeze on inspectors at Cal OSHA. There are less than 200 OSHA inspectors in California for 18 million workers. So at the Tesla plant, they allow Elon Musk to make sure that they're safe. What a laugh. That Elon Musk cares about these workers. There's infections, and these workers at the Tesla plant go into Central Valley by buses, and they're spreader buses. So why haven't they enforced the OSHA laws? This is not Trump. This is not Trump. This is Gavin Newsom. Why haven't they enforced the OSHA laws? Why are there less than 200 OSHA inspectors for 18 million people in California? You know why? Because Gavin Newsom is controlled by the billionaires. Gavin Newsom is controlled by Elon Musk and the other billionaires. That's who the Democrats and Republicans work for. It's a bipartisan policy. They both support capitalism. They both support profiteering. Even in Argentina, for example, they passed a tax law to tax the rich in Argentina to pay for COVID. In California, nationally, there is no capital tax on the billionaires. What we're saying is we need a labor party. We need working people to stand up and organize themselves against these racist attacks, and we need a political alternative. The rise of Trump is a failure of working people in this country to have their own political party, a workers' party that's going to have a program for them, democratically run. So that's what we're here today. We're going to have a number of speakers address these issues. So our first speaker is Christina Lee from the Freedom Socialist Party. Welcome, Christina.
All right. So the left has long warned about the rise of an emboldened right wing. You know, their targets are multiracial democracy, immigrants, people of color, queer folks. They are anti-feminist and racist and anti-worker. We must unite to defend our right to protest. We saw how, you know, the right wing is treated with kid gloves by the police, the Capitol Police, and whatever other law enforcement agents were sent, because those agents are in agreement with the right wing. I mean, we even had legislators opening the door to let them into the Capitol. And so we must defend our right as leftists to protest, because the cops don't protect leftists and people of color and queer folks. So we must unite to protect one another and protect the working class. And in order to do that, we've got to unite to end capitalism, which is the thing that oppresses all of us and keeps us all down. Thank you. And thank you.
So our next speaker is John Ryman. He's with Socialist Independent.
Sisters and brothers, comrades. Sisters and brothers, comrades. I'd like to start off by reading part of a message of solidarity from the Somali Public Trade Union, which I received this morning. And they said they stand in solidarity with all those fighting to defend democracy in the U.S. and in particular with the U.S. labor movement. The workers, they conclude, the workers of the world won democracy through their blood. The anti-democratic and post-truth poison spread by Trump has infected democracies around the world. The SPTU, as one of its key actors, joins Democrats, with a small d, everywhere to unite to push back against this assault on our hard-won rights. And I have a few copies of this here. I also have it online if you're interested. Now, I'd like to make one comment about the role of the police in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday. And a lot of people, including even a lot of capitalist politicians, have condemned the police and explained that they went so easy because the fascists were white, by and large. And they have pointed out that if it had been black or brown people, that the police would have acted very differently. And that's true, and yes, it was a matter of racism, but it's a lot deeper than that. Because we should remember that in Germany, under the Nazis, who did they go for first? It wasn't the Jews. They went after the communists and the trade unionists first. And the real reason, linked with the question of racism, the other fundamental reason was that, as even Don Lemon on CNN had to admit, that the entire police structure and also the politicians, they viewed these people as patriots, which they were in fact, but that is the underlying and also an important reason that politically they are on the same side. So I want to emphasize, yes, racism was part of it, but there's also that underlying reason. So the main point I want to raise is we have to ask ourselves, how did we get to this point where, according to the figures, 40% or more of voters who come from trade union families voted for this racist, bigot, lunatic Trump? How did we get to that point? And we have to, in talking about that, in thinking about it, we have to admit, we have to look at the situation inside our unions and the entire union leadership. We must not forget this. We must not hide it. We must not hide from it. The entire union leadership, from the top, from Trumka, all the way down to the local union leadership, has waged a 75-year war against those who wish to maintain the best traditions, the fighting traditions of the labor movement of the 1930s. And that includes against socialists, but not only socialists. They've belittled them, they've ostracized them, they've expelled them from the unions, they've physically assaulted them, and they've also blackballed them. And the result of that has allowed them to continue on their way as the number one representatives of the employers inside the unions, and number two, the representatives of the very Democrats that we condemn here today, rightfully so. We must not hide from that. It also includes their propaganda in many instances that have actually brought representatives of the employers into the unions to lecture the union members that they have to work harder and faster. And so what we need, amongst other things, we need to help rank and file union members organize organized oppositions to the union leadership, to fight to break the unions from the Democrats, and also to break the unions from their pro-employer policies. So, also, I think that we also have to recognize what happened in Georgia the other day with the election of the two Democrats in Georgia in that runoff election.
Wait till this passes.
And that election, we know that the Democrats, including those two, are no solution. But we also have to look at the process. And who was it that drove through the defeat of those two Republicans, as well as who drove through the defeat of Trump in the national election? First and foremost, it was black voters in general, but first and foremost, black women. They were the ones that were the driving force. And I cannot imagine that after what happened in Georgia, that they won't be feeling a bit empowered. And who knows where that can go from here. We know that we have an absolutely disastrous economic situation in this country, with tens of millions of people, first and foremost again, black and Latino workers on the food lines and homeless. And we know that Biden and the Democrats will not provide any sort of solution to that. So what we need, in addition to this united front against fascism, or linked to it, is a campaign, a joint campaign to fight for the economic steps that we all need as working class people. And we have here, I have here also a call that's put out, a call to action to demand those economic steps. And I won't read the whole thing. If anybody wants a copy of it, I'll be happy to give it to you. But I'll just conclude with this, that I would like to congratulate those who organized this protest, because it's been a long time coming that the left in general has ignored the fascistic and repressive measures that Trump and the Republicans are taking and that the Democrats are complicit with. So we need more of this. We need to demand that the unions fight for it. And linked with that, we need to build a united action to fight for the economic steps that the working class and the poor need just in order to survive, and to demand that the workers, that the labor movement, that they join in and lead that struggle. That all is part of the struggle to break with the Democrats and to build a mass, radical, fighting, working class party in this country. Thank you very much.
One of the things that we also have to say is that this is an international struggle. We have brothers and sisters. John mentioned the Somalian workers, but also there are workers in Namibia, actually, who are fighting. The Namibian Mining Workers Union at the Rossing mine has been privatized. It was at first a Rio Tinto, but now a Chinese company have bought the mine, and they tried to get them to take concessions, and then they fired the leadership of the miners' union there. So we're demanding they be returned to their job. This is an international struggle. It's not just the United States, it's China, it's multinationals around the world who are oppressing people, exploiting people, and pushing them into slave labor. And that's what people in this country face, slave labor. The gig workers, the millions of workers who've been forced to be gig workers, they can't survive. Their conditions are being destroyed. And Prop 22, which they paid $200 million for, was going to lead to further exploitation of workers in this country. So our next speaker is Judy Greenspan, and she's with the Workers' World Party. Welcome, Judy.
So I'm Judy Greenspan. I'm with Workers' World Party. I want to thank please bear with me if the committee, the United Front Committee for a Labor Party for calling this very important demonstration. In reality, there should be millions of people in the street, right? Millions of people demanding, intervening and saying no fascism, no racism in the United States. It's not surprising that the police allowed this to happen, because the police are with the fascists. They defend the fascists. We always said, particularly during the civil rights movement, we said cops and Klan work hand in hand. And that's true. Can you hold it above my head a little bit? Thanks. Cops and Klan do work hand in hand, and we saw that with the Capitol Police. Yes, we do need a labor party, but more than that, we need the independent intervention of the workers to prevent fascism. There is no other way. It's not going to be the Democrats. It's not going to be the liberal Republicans. It's not going to be any of the bourgeois parties. It's not going to be the National Association of Manufacturers, because they said, hey, we're not for this coup either, we're on your side. It has to be the working class. And the working class and if they're waiting for the leadership of the AFL-CIO at this time, it's not going to happen. It has to be, unless there is a groundswell from the bottom. The leadership in the organized. Now I want to talk a little bit. I would like to just take a couple of minutes and read the statement that Workers' World Party issued following the coup. The coup attempt today in Washington, D.C., and this was on January 6th, and the mobilization of a fascist mob numbering in the tens of thousands must be viewed with the utmost seriousness. While the attack took the form of an assault on the U.S. Capitol building, Congress, and the so-called institution of democracy, halting for hours the constitutionally mandated approval of the presidential election, these white supremacist forces pose the greatest threat to the working class, especially the most oppressed. Their political aim is to crush with an iron fist even the most modest of workers' rights, social justice, and the Black Lives Matter movement. This coup was against the Black Lives Matter movement. Capitalist politicians in both major parties are falling all over each other to disassociate themselves from the would-be coup makers and from Trump, the instigator. But the failure of the state apparatus, and that's what I said, especially the police, to prevent an outright invasion, however short-lived, of the citadel of U.S. political power shows that those in power are unreliable, inept, and in no way up to the task of beating back a fascist threat. We, the workers and oppressed within the U.S., cannot depend on the state to prevent violent KKK-like attacks, especially those on workers of color, who are and always have been the fascist primary targets. When have the Democrats or the Republicans ever offered any real protection? This fascist movement, which we saw, marked a turning point in the worst way and demands a mass independent response from the working class. We call on all of our sides' organizations, the unions, the youth, the Black Lives Matter movement, immigrants, people with disabilities, LGBTQ plus people, women's and gender non-conforming people, including unemployed, low-wage, healthcare, transit, public sector, blue-collar, gig, education, incarcerated, and sex workers, to mobilize to crush the white supremacist fascist forces. General strike now, shut it down. And until we get this independent mobilization, we will not be able to win. Thank you again for calling this important demonstration. Hopefully, we will soon have millions back in the streets.
And there are some unions in this country that have called for a general strike. The Vermont AFL-CIO called for a general strike against an attempted coup. The Madison Southeast Labor Council of Wisconsin called for a general strike against an attempted coup. The Seattle Kings County Labor Council called for a general strike against an attempted coup. And when the Vermont AFL-CIO said they were going to call a general strike against a coup, guess what? Richard Trumka, the president of the AFL-CIO, said it was out of order. Out of order. You can't vote to support a general strike. Now imagine that. Think about that. We're faced with a coup in this country, and the leader of the AFL-CIO says you can't take a motion to have a general strike against a coup. Who does he represent? Who does this Trumka represent? Telling workers that they shouldn't have a general strike against a coup in the United States? Who does he represent? Does he represent the cousters? Is that who he represents? And that is the problem of our trade union movement, that the working class and the unions are held back by the union bureaucrats who are waiting for the Democrats to save us. The Democrats will not save the working people of this country. Yeah. They couldn't even protect the Capitol, much less save the people of this country. So we have to understand that it's a self-organization of workers is the only way that we're going to defend ourselves. So our next speaker is Edward Escobar with the Alliance of Workers, and he's also going to read a statement.
Sí se puede. Yes, we can. Sí se puede. Yes, we can. Sí se puede. Yes, we can. Thank you, everyone, for coming out here today to support all of us Americans and workers and people around the world. Because we cannot stay silent, because being silent is complicit. And that's saying that it's okay. It is not okay. We know it's not okay. We've always known it's not okay. It's not just Trump. This is a systemic problem. This is a problem that the U.S. has been exporting globally. This is corporate exploitation to the nth degree. We cannot accept this, people. We had legislation that was bought and paid for, a ballot initiative, Prop 22, that was corporate, multinational, multi-billion-dollar tech titans of Silicon Valley. They spent $225 million on buying legislation to overturn AB 5, not for everyone, just for themselves. They wanted a carve out just for themselves. So they couldn't get it any other way, they bought it. They're taking that same approach across the country. And the problem with that is not just about Uber, Lyft drivers, delivery drivers. What's happening is that corporations are finding a way to bypass the law. They're writing their own laws, people. They couldn't get it done any other way. So what they're doing now, and you'll see that it's not just Uber, Lyft drivers, delivery drivers. You have Vons, Albertsons, Safeway. They are now firing their workers, delivery workers, and they're hiring app-based companies so that they could continue to abuse and use workers' exploitation. We're talking about extreme vulture capitalism. At the cost of what? At the cost of what, people? Human suffering. Human suffering that's going on and on and on. And we can't take it. They think we're vulnerable right now because of COVID. We're weak right now because of COVID. That's what they think. No, the American people are strong. We've proven it many times. Let's prove it again for the right reason. And we need to take this back and put people before profits. People before profits. Let me hear you. People before profits. People before profits. There is so much money to go around. Look at the new tech billionaire, Elon Musk. They gloat. They gloat about how rich they are. The rich are getting richer. The poor are getting poorer. Even the middle class is being squeezed out of existence, people. This is not just the lower class. They're coming after all of us. Even small, medium-sized businesses are being squeezed out. These lockdowns are extreme. We want safe return to businesses. That means OSHA doing their damn job. OSHA needs to do their job. That means providing requirements for PPE to be used in the workplace, social distancing, all the proper protections in the workplace. That is what we need, a safe return to work. Not a blind return to work like some of these other anti-masker folks and so on and so forth. The GOP folks, the Proud Boys, all these other ones. They don't understand. You're killing your own people because those are their own people that have to go to work. They are working class people. Those are blue collar. A lot of those folks are blue collar. They don't understand because they're taking the poison, the misdirection of the messaging. And they're buying it hook, line, and sinker. We cannot allow that. We need to have an awakening, people. And now's the time. Do not believe the saviors of the corporate Democrats. That is a lost leader. It's not going to happen. We need to be on them like white on rice. We need to be on them, okay? It's not something that's going to happen by default. A lot of people are falling asleep thinking that because the senators won in Georgia, so now we have both houses. Really? We do? Really? Who's we? Who's we? Just us? Justice is just us, right? Just us for who? It's not even the 1%er, it's the less than the 1%. You have a lot of these folks that are working on their behalves. Well, when push comes to shove, they'll be thrown under the bus too. And they think that they are part of the upper echelon. No, they're not. No, they're not. You are used and abused and kicked to the curb for their convenience, and that is convenience of extreme profit and exploitation at the cost of working people. So my name is Edward Escobar with the Alliance for Independent Workers. It's hashtag Drivers Unite, hashtag Gig Workers Unite, hashtag Truckers Unite. Yes, we work with truckers, and a lot of them are Republicans. And we tell them, don't give your support away blindly. Make these politicians earn it. They have to earn the right to be there. And if they don't do the job, then get the hell out. Get the hell out. And if we need to invoke the 25th Amendment, not if, it should have been done long ago. Long ago. So where are we at? We have to keep pushing. We can't fall asleep at the wheel. It has to happen now, before it is getting too late, people. We have AI, automation, self-driving technology. These are major paradigm shifts. When are they ushered in? During times of crises. During COVID time, while everyone is expecting nothing to happen. Things are happening, people. It's happening behind the scenes. We just are not paying attention. They're redirecting and diverting our attention elsewhere like a magician does. Don't look over here instead. That's what they're using COVID, crisis. It's called shock doctrine. So, people, this is something that has been talked about. Naomi Klein wrote the book Shock Doctrine, as a matter of fact. So you might want to take a look at that. But Proposition 22 is an issue that is causing problems. It's going to cause problems across the country and around the world. Everyone is looking at the U.S. of what we're doing. And they're going to be using that for exploitation. So I'm going to read a statement right now that has been put together. Steve Seltzer has asked me to read. Fascist Trump supporters demanded that Trump be declared president again, even though he lost the popular vote. An all-white regiment of men armed to their teeth marched into D.C. and stormed Congress to stage an outright coup. Photos taken from the scenes of the crime speaks the volumes. That's in this article. The aggressors meant business. They were carrying automatic guns, ropes, and handcuffs to take hostages, and Dixie flags with Trump is president inscriptions. Within a few hours of the siege on Congress, right-wing paramilitary gangs in other states such as Oregon and Kansas took it to the streets. There's no way that the FBI and other security agencies were oblivious to plans of violence by the fascists on a mass scale. They allowed it to happen nonetheless. There is no question that Black Lives Matter protesters, leftists, workers, or people of color organizations would have been shot dead for much less havoc. Events in both D.C. and around the country point to a synchronized, tightly knit organization by the fascists in tandem with the police. None of this should have been a surprise to anyone. The pandemic, combined with Trump's racist rhetoric and policies, has untethered the vile racism that has existed in this country since its inception. The U.S. is based on both the genocide of the indigenous population and upon slavery, and that is even workers, financial slavery. Capitalist politics has pit one ethnic group against the other for years, driving down the wages of all workers. U.S. imperialism has uprooted workers internationally, especially from Latin America, and forced them to migrate to the United States. This has added fuel to the fire for these racist thugs. Trump speaks hatefully about the oppressed, while his actions continue to widen racial divisions within the working class. These tensions can only result in racist violence. We should not have been surprised, people. In fact, many of us, especially revolutionaries, have predicted this for years. For the last few months, the UFCLP has warned against the violence unleashed both by the police and by the paramilitary gangs against protesters who demand justice for the victims of police terror. We called attention to the increasingly organized nature of the so-called counter-protests called for by white supremacists. We demanded that the left and the organized working class form united fronts and public safety committees. When the Republicans seemed to be retreating in the face of the slim Democrat victory, We pointed out that this concession was a tactic to buy time and whip up support. Our warnings didn't come out of the blue, but from careful observation of Trump's tactics and actions. Throughout the summer, Trump did everything in his power to put down the anti-racist popular revolt and steal the election. He deposed the commander of the armed forces when the latter refused to deploy troops against the people in revolt. Trump's threats to overturn the election and stay in power no matter what the results dictated were commonplace. Today we are witnessing their culmination. This is not the ordinary racist mob that this country is unfortunately used to. This is an organized fascist attack. The trade union leadership has been missing in action, allowing the capitalist politicians, both Democrat and Republicans, to follow the lead of their bosses, permitting Trump to become the leader of the quote-unquote free world. Trump did not just appear from thin air. The ground has been laid for him for more than 4 decades. By the 1970s, working class people began to take a hit. Outsourcing became the linchpin of capitalist development. Privatization of public services held sway, and many workers were barely able to hold on to their jobs. At the same time, the Southern strategy was employed, pitting white working class people against workers of color. The union leadership took no stand against the cuts. In fact, when air traffic controllers went on strike in 1981, the workers were left high and dry by the bureaucrats who refused to call for a general strike to support them. Capitulations like this eventually threw white workers into the clutches of a demagogue like Trump. Nonetheless, trade union so-called leaders have been supporting Democrats who have time and time again demonstrated that are as anti-worker as the Republicans. No surprise. We are still asked to put our faith in the police, who are the same goons that shoot black people daily. The chickens are now coming home to roost. This outburst was inevitable. We shouldn't harbor any illusions that the Democrats, the corporate Democrats, will come to our rescue, for they are unwilling to fight even for their democratically won election. Today's events proved irrefutably that relying on the forces of law and order to uphold their own rules is a deadly mistake. In fact, the mayor of Portland has now said he is gunning for Antifa instead of the Proud Boys, who created the crises in Portland in the first place. Ted Wheeler, a Democrat, went on national TV to announce that he will no longer tolerate dissent and therefore will be going after Antifa. One can expect this kind of rhetoric more and more from public figures. We have seen this all before. Capitalism has already plunged the world into 2 world wars and countless others, killing untold millions. The capitalists and their politician servants are criminals against humanity. This kind of carnage will continue if we let it, impacting people of the color worse. This country is in deep crisis because capitalism is gasping for breath in its death throes. Unless there is a working class movement to cohesively coordinate challenges and coordinated challenge against this capitalist assault, repression against people who are fighting for their legitimate rights will go on. The police will come down harder on people of color for any perceived transgressions. So we need to build a political party based on working class self-activity, and eventually we need a society that is built and controlled by workers. The only way we will survive the devastation of wars foisted on working class people globally is to change society from one based on profits to one based on human cooperation. This means, that is a big whoa. That means building a socialist society. As a first step, we need to form a Labor Party independent of capitalist politicians that will guide the working class to fight for their rights and the rights of all oppressed people. This incident at the Capitol will be the first of many. We have to decide as workers how to stand tall, firm, against fascists to defend and expand our democratic conquest, and how we can eventually rid the world of this type of extreme vulture capitalism. Forward for workers, united front against fascism, forward for a workers' party. Down with the fascists, down with the corporate fascists, general strike to defend and expand our democratic conquest, millions of fellow workers. To the streets, to the streets. United Front Committee for Labor Party. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Bethany Smith. She's with the United Front Committee for a Labor Party and a member of UAW 2865. Welcome, Bethany.
Hi. Today I want to read you, can you hear me actually? Yeah, there we go. Get closer. How about there? Are we good? Awesome. Cool. So we mentioned a whole lot about unity. I have here 3 letters of solidarity from parties around the world, including Argentina, France, and Turkey. I'm going to read you these statements today. All right, here we go. First, from Argentina. The world was shocked to see the images of Trump supporters occupying the Capitol. The sort of violent political tactics that the U.S. has promoted against elected governments around the world have come home to roost. The attempt never had much of a chance of actually seizing power, but did serve as the founding moment for a more centralized fascist movement, grouping together the different far-right organizations that follow Trump, while at the same time marking the split with traditional Republican politicians, who would mostly not follow Trump to such lengths and are adjusting to negotiating the terms of common policies to favor big capital with the coming Biden-Harris administration. Biden has clearly shown no interest in Trump and his conspirators facing legal consequences for their actions. A purge of far-right extremists would have far-reaching implications for police forces all over the country, bourgeois politicians of both parties, and the businessmen who finance them. The Partido Obrero of Argentina gives its support to all those who work in the U.S. to form an independent party for the working class, which is an urgent need when the political crisis shows its gravity and the ongoing misery generated in the masses by the capitalist crisis. With workers and oppressive masses as protagonists, as we have seen during rebellions against police repression during 2020, we need to come together and form a labor party. Advancing in forming a working class leadership is crucial when faced with two strategic tasks. 1, agitate all urgent working class demands against the Biden government of big capital. We do not accept suspending the struggle for work, food, housing, and medical attention at the end of police repression with the excuse of not off-putting the government of Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and the military-industrial complex. 2, on the other hand, the existence of a fascist movement which is moving to organize around Trump undoubtedly puts forward the concrete material problem of who will win the streets. The workers, the youths, the people of color, women's movements, the LGBT+ community, them, it's us, or the fascists. The state will not solve this. Only the organization of united front activities of all those in struggle can physically defeat fascism and state repression. As internationalists, we think it's more urgent than ever to hold a new conference of revolutionaries in the United States and Latin America to collaborate on these urgent tasks. Long live the working class and all oppressed people fighting in the U.S. Partido Obrero, Argentina. Whew. Letter number 2 from the Workers' Revolutionary Resurgence in France. Comrades, we the revolutionary militants in France are only too familiar with the sight of fascist gangs trying to assault the parliament. Indeed, in 1934, a short while after the Nazis took power, their French cohorts violently attempted to storm the French parliament in an episode that left dozens dead. Only the ensuing Workers' United Front and the resolute action of the various working class organizations were able to nip that fascist threat in the bud. Fascism, that age-old enemy of the working class and all the oppressed, is once again showing its hideous face. The onslaught by the MAGA hordes to the Capitol is the last and most dramatic salvo of a fascist threat that has been gaining strength in the US, France, and around the world. Just like the surge of the fascist enemy, we also have to observe the murderous apathy of the Bidens and the Macrons of the world. We cannot and do not have any trust in the Bidens or the Macrons. As they prove themselves unwilling and incapable to fight fascism on both sides of the Atlantic, we have no remedy but to organize the united fight for workers, people of color, and the youth against these fascist thugs. As the militants of the Workers' Revolutionary Resurgence of France, we declare that we are in full solidarity with your fight to thwart the fascist enemy. In the France and the US and around the world, let us build the workers' united front to crush the fascist thugs. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And we have one more. This one is fairly short. So this is from Turkey. Whoop, whoop. This is from the Revolutionary Workers' Party in Turkey. So, dear comrades, the Revolutionary Workers' Party of Turkey extends its heartfelt solidarity to the workers, communities of color, and all the oppressed of America in the crucible of a fascist uprising. The fascist hordes of MAGA storming the Capitol building showed once again the imminent threat that fascism represents all over the globe. The all-too-expected complicity of the cops and the criminal inaction of the Democrats prove that we can only count on the organized actions of the masses. Can I hear a woo-woot? We have no time for complacency, as the fascist enemy is at the gates. The ilk of Biden, who preaches a return to normalcy, is paving the way for a fascist takeover. In the US and elsewhere, we need to fight back with all means necessary. Only the swift and decisive action of the workers, people of color, and all the oppressed in America, independent from the Democratic Party and the establishment, can be a bulwark against the fascist threat and deliver victory. Fight Trump and MAGA by any means necessary. The Revolutionary Workers' Party from Turkey. So, in light of all of these support around the globe, we also want to build a labor party here. So the people who hosted this event are called the United Front Committee for a Labor Party, and we have a 10-point mission statement to confront the new capitalist chaos, and I'm going to read them to you right now. All right. So our 10-point mission statement. 1. Forward for a mass workers' party independent of both bosses' parties. Political independence to the working class. 2. Workers of color united in the labor struggle. 3. Reduce the working week, secure full employment, adjust the wages for inflation, and proper PPE for every worker in this pandemic, and all the time, actually. 4, united front against fascism, racism, and tyranny. 5, every town will be a union town. No open shop workplaces, no union busting. 6, full grassroots democracy in the unions. 7, defund the police, defund the military, defund the FBI, cops out of unions. Woo! Yeah, no, that's 8. Fight COVID, fight poverty, defund the killers and refund the workers. Stop all evictions, cancel rent. Build shelters for the homeless. Capital tax for all billionaires, and let the billions pay the bill for the crisis, not the workers. 9, say no to privatization, no layoffs during or after the pandemic. Nationalize all hospitals and schools under workers' control. 10, say no to imperialism and militarism. Contact us. In our times of social collapse, a labor party founded and controlled by workers themselves is more necessary than ever. The two bosses' parties are conspiring to take away all we have. Forward for an independent workers' party to confront them. You can find us on Facebook at Mass Labor Party USA or at Twitter, or you can find us on WordPress. And we would love to have you organize with us.
One of the issues that has to be addressed as well is systemic racism. And you would think in San Francisco, the quote liberal city, that there isn't racism here. The reality is there is systemic racism. There are murders of blacks and browns in San Francisco, and also in the city and county of San Francisco, there have been racist attacks on black workers. Hundreds have been fired, bullied, harassed, terrorized. And this coming Monday, there's going to be a press conference at the San Francisco Health Service System at 1145 Market Street. By the San Francisco Bayview newspaper, by us and many others, with black workers talking about how they've been illegally fired, harassed, and they're going to demand the firing of the director, the CEO, Mitch of this San Francisco health service system. So we ask that you all come out. So our next speaker is Lisa Milos. And Lisa, when we talk about coups in the United States, and this is the first coup and insurrection in the history of the United States, and it's led by the President of the United States. Can you imagine that? The President of the United States leads a coup and an insurrection so he can stay in office, and they won't certify the votes. But actually, the United States has been involved in coups all over the world. 130 coups. They've overthrown one country after another, including in Chile, where they overthrew the Allende government and set up the Pinochet regime. The United States and these politicians, including Biden, who supported the invasion of Iraq, and Obama, who supported the attack on Libya. These people have blood in their hands. And next is Lisa Milos. She's a rank and file member of UPTI, CWA UPTI at UC San Francisco. Welcome, Lisa.
What I have to say might not be make many people uncomfortable. But I didn't vote for Biden. I wasn't going to be voting for a party that has been in charge of warmongering, has been in the hands of Wall Street, has cost the lives of millions of people around the world in their bombing campaigns, as well as the Republican Party. Both of those parties have got to go. What I also think is happening here with regard to the attempted coup or the insurrection is that this is going to play right into the hands of the Democratic Party during these next 4 years, where they're going to be trying to, again, stop any kind of dissent and apply domestic terrorism laws mostly against the left, mostly against the Black Lives Matter movement. They're not going to be applying it towards them. They're going to just get a few of those useful idiots, white supremacist assholes in jail, but they're not going to go after the big guy. They're not going to go after even the Department of Defense, which refused support and delayed the deployment of National Guard to protect the damn Congress. Nancy Pelosi could have chosen to impeach the president on incitement to violence charges, just like the charges that were placed against the President Andrew Johnson in 1868, when he incited violence against Congress members with his rhetoric. She could have impeached him on charges of obstruction of justice, just like the impeachment charges were placed against Nixon for firing the Attorney General, Archibald Cox, because he was investigating him. Those were precedents that they had in their hands, that the Democratic Party had in their hands to impeach Trump way before. They could have done it. They could have done it way before. They had precedents. They had evidence of incitement to violence against sitting members of Congress, Muslim sitting members of Congress, Rashid Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. But Nancy Pelosi didn't do anything about that. What do? They decided to go the Russiagate way. Why? Why do we think that the Democrats went and started this impeachment on so-called Russiagate charges? Why? Because this way, they can impose a narrative of supposedly election tampering on Russia, where they really had no proof of that. And they could promote McCarthyism, because people in this country still don't seem to realize that the USSR is no longer there and Russia has nothing to do with that. They could have also imposed, they did the Russiagate as well because they wanted to gag the international press by attacking Assange for exposing war crimes, by creating a false link between Assange and Russia and election tampering. They did that in order to gag the international press, so the international press would no longer publish anything that had to do with US war crimes. The Democratic Party is just as nefarious as the Republican Party. It's just as nefarious. During the Obama presidency, we had a black president with a black attorney general that allowed the killing of hundreds of black people in the streets, and they did not prosecute any policemen whatsoever during 8 years. During 8 years that they had the government in their hands. And then the first thing that Biden says is he blames defund the police because they lost some Congress members during the elections. Now, it seems to me that defund the police is a security imperative for all members of Congress. Not let alone black and brown communities, because they've proven that the police are in cahoots with racist rioters. And now they're going to use domestic terrorism laws against us, just like the Democrats approved the Patriot Act. And who do we have to blame for all these ignorant rioters in the streets, these white supremacists in the streets? In part, Clinton. The Telecommunications Act of 1996 allowed the conglomeration of media, which allowed for all of these right-wing evangelical radio stations inside this country to keep on spewing lies to people. And allowed for people to become completely radicalized in the wrong way, become fascist, because they're feeling the brunt. They're feeling the brunt of the 1% against them. But who do they fault? As in typical American fascism, they fault the poor people, they fault the immigrants, they fault their fellow workers. And many times they vote against their own interests. They've also attacked the immigrants as well, and allow for the detention of children during both Democratic as well as Republican administrations. So yes, we need a united labor front, desperately. We need a united labor front that doesn't accept neoliberalism, that doesn't accept Zionism, that does not accept imperialism. We need a united labor front that does not and will be denounces the Democratic Party for promoting warmongering. We cannot allow this to happen. We need to step up, and we need to organize a united labor front. Thank you.
We have here in San Francisco brothers and sisters from around the world, and many of them have been forced to escape from this country, as a matter of fact, because of U.S.-supported military coups. And let's be clear, Biden now is faced with an insurrection in which he says he can't even take a position of the impeachment of Trump for this insurrection. What kind of business is that? Biden says that this guy should not be impeached for an insurrection. One of the things that this may result in is that the ability of the U.S. imperialist regime to overthrow governments may be declining because they have to worry about an insurrection right here in the United States. That is something we have to understand. But our next speaker is Mehmet Bayram, and he has been involved in a fight for workers here and around the world. Welcome, Mehmet Bayram.
Thank you, brothers and sisters. Thank you for coming today. We should have had millions here. Where are they? Where are the unions? Why didn't they bring their members? Where is the rest of the left? You don't fight fascism with 20 people, 30 people. I lived through fascist coups twice. This is how it starts. This is exactly how it starts. For how long have we been talking whether fascism is coming to the United States? Well, you just started seeing it. Fascists never, ever attack or organize by themselves. They have to have the state power help them, behind them. The cowards will never ever try to come in and take over the government buildings if the police, if the army wasn't behind them. I've seen this twice in my life in other countries. This is how it happens. It starts like this. It starts like this, with the government opening it up just a little, just to see how much they can do. But as the other brothers and sisters were saying, they bring curfew, they bring restrictions to stop us. And on the first day we said, this is going to turn against us, not the Proud Boys, not the white racists, not the fascists. And immediately we started seeing that those big tech companies that work with the state immediately start putting censorship. Yes, to Trump first. But where were those people who are now joyful, who are happy that Trump has been silenced, when the Palestinian sites were being censored in Facebook? When the progressives were being silenced in Google, in Facebook, and everywhere else? So they will show us that Trump has been silenced, but look at it soon. All the rest is going to go down. This is how it starts. We need to be careful. We need to be careful that we don't rely on classes that are not with us. The Democrats and the Republicans are the parties of the rich, the bankers, the corporations. And no matter what, under capitalism, they will benefit. But the capitalism is in decline now. Capitalism cannot feed the mouths of the people. Here in the richest country in the world, we have miles and miles of hungry people in line just to get food. And capitalism doesn't have one fucking answer to this. So the only way that they have is fascism. Bring the billy clubs, bring the police, bring the army, bring the FBI. Now, after so much talk, they have secured the government buildings. Yeah, sure. It means that the rest of the journalists are not allowed. Not only the Proud Boys, but the rest of the journalists are not allowed. They don't have free access to those people to ask questions. I've seen 2 fascist coups in my life. And the third one was a fake one, just like what we have seen. This is going to work against us. The Proud Boys are their power on the street. As we have seen in Portland, the police chiefs give information to the Proud Boys on where Antifa is. The police chief calls the Proud Boys and says, we can't protect you here and there. We don't have enough police force there. Is this the police that we are going to rely on to protect from these fascist thugs, fascist gangs? No, we have to get together. We have to get together in a united front. Our class says all the left parties, they need to get together to fight fascism. We have to join forces. As I've seen in the other coups, even if you have a well-organized left, if they don't come together in a united front, we are divided. We have to win over the sectarianism. We have to come together on the street. This is how you fight fascism. You don't fight fascism getting together with the Democratic parties, millionaires and billionaires. We talk to the people who voted for the Democratic Party. Yes, we also talk to the people who voted for Trump. They think that unemployment, they think that their future was going to be saved by Trump. We have to talk to them that that's no way out. And then that's how we can win those people who have been on the other side of the line.
There are so many important things that were said here. But I just want to mention, well, we were talking just before this event began right here about an interview that took place with an FBI agent. What a joke. He's talking about there are not enough laws to deal with domestic terrorism. Can you imagine that? Anyway, I mean, there's so many things that people said that are important for people to take home with them and put into practice. I'm here speaking on behalf of Refuse Fascism, and I want to read a statement. Refuse Fascism, for those of you who may not be... sorry. Those who may not be familiar with Refuse Fascism began 4 years ago, right after the election of Trump, calling out the danger of a fascist movement in this country, especially one that's in power. Fascism has been around a long time in this country. And the basis for fascism, you know, the polluted system here, the racism and the various forms of hatred in this society, this is what this country's been based on. Genocide and slavery and the snatching away of territory from Mexico in a war that the U.S. provoked. These are the bases on which this country has grown. It's a white colonial settler society in many respects. Anyway, I will go on with that. But I will read the statement from Refuse Fascism, which came out today. Refuse Fascism is now, today as I speak, conducting rallies and car caravans. There's a car caravan that left from City Hall. It's going around the city right now. Anyway, so this is a statement for all those around the country who are gathering like you are today. It matters that we're out here today, each of you and all of us together. Last Wednesday, the world witnessed with shock MAGA mobs storming the U.S. Capitol, climbing the walls, smashing windows, rampaging the halls, and looting congressional offices, called forth and unleashed by Trump, who could be called the wannabe second president of the Confederacy. Even after the violent siege, 8 GOP senators and 139 representatives, 2/3 of the Republic fascists in the House of Representatives still voted to overturn the election. A new poll yesterday showed that 77% of Republicans still support Trump. This was an attempted fascist coup, and it was years in the making. That is the word fascism. What is it? It's vigilantes shooting Black Lives Matter protesters. It's open white supremacy. It's refugees in concentration camps. It's paramilitary forces using violence to suppress dissent. It is lie upon lie, such that the concept of what is real and what is true is destroyed. And I think that's a really important point. The question of truth and the question of science and the attack on science. Now Trump must go. The fascists are still rampaging in state houses around the country. They are bragging about their accomplishments, threatening further mayhem, and are already making their assault on January 6th a rallying cry to come back. Trump, for his part, is upholding his stormtroopers and is reportedly even more bellicose and unhinged. Every day Trump remains in power, he poses a catastrophic danger to humanity. What is more, he must be decisively repudiated, impeached, and convicted, which would mean he could never come back to elected office. Even more important, this would be a real setback to the fascist movement he leads. The movement is not going away, even with Trump removed. There are tens of millions of people who have been led, organized, and shaped in a fascist direction with their own media and schools and institutions for over 40 years to view themselves as the quote-unquote real America. There are elected officials at all levels of government who view and will act as if the Biden administration is illegitimate, and now they have an armed street fighting force on call, filled with revenge. And I just want to say here, I agree with what was said about Biden. There's no question about what the Democrats have done. There is no question about that. The Democrats have been in the forefront of all the imperialist wars and all the imperialist actions from the very beginning. And those of us who cut our teeth in the 1960s, the war in Vietnam, that was a war that was conducted by the Democrats. But this fascist movement is a different animal within the capitalist system, much more dangerous. People have been pointing that out. So there is the question of uniting as broadly as possible to oppose it. Let me just finish this statement. I know it's a rather long one, but they will continue to undermine the very concept of truth, leaving tens of millions to be susceptible to the calls of the demagogue and the vilest conspiracy theories. If the millions of people, and this is a really important point here, who desire a just world, who care about humanity, fail to act, it will not appease these fascists. It will leave them a clear field to advance. We saw on Wednesday where this leads. Now it is important, as calls ricochet through Congress to impeach Trump, for us to put our bodies in the streets, nonviolently but determined to demand Trump's immediate removal now. Already there is talk, including among some Democrats, that impeachment would only further divide the country. And it is time to move forward and get to the work of, quote unquote, healing the country and governing. But the road to Wednesday's fascist coup attempt was paved by the very refusal to hold Trump and his fascists accountable again and again over 4 years. Not after Charlottesville, not after children locked in cages, not after Trump's acquittal and a weakly pursued impeachment on very narrow grounds, which only cemented Trump's belief that he was above the law. This passivity and accommodation must end now. To wait longer, to hold back, amounts to capitulation. Now must be the time for decent people to stand up nonviolently in massive numbers from many different backgrounds and political perspectives. But united in our determination to act, we demand Trump's immediate removal to stop the tremendous harm he can do in the next 11 days. We demand this now as part of building the strength for our side for the fight to decisively defeat this fascism which has been allowed to fester and spew forth. Note well, a failed coup can lead to a successful coup or a legitimate return to power, quote unquote legitimate, fueled by the same fascist program but with a vengeance. The struggle for the future is far from over. Humanity needs us, needs you to be in the streets, using safe disease prevention protocol, but most of all, demonstrating our values of respect for diversity and a hunger for justice in stark contrast to the hate and bigotry of the vicious American fascism. We must continue to speak and act and call forth others. Our just and necessary demand that Trump be removed from power now must be met, not just by ourselves, not for ourselves, but for all of humanity. Trump out now. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. Thank you.
We are going to continue this fight. The fight against fascism is not over. This is a warning to us and all working people in this country. It's time to prepare. It's time to take this seriously. It's time to build a united front against fascism. It's time to build a united front for a workers' party so we have a working class political alternative. We need it because there is going to be other coups. There's going to be other attempts to overturn this government and set up a dictatorship. That is the warning that we have to take. So forward, onward, solidarity with the working class, victory to working people against this corrupt government, Democrats and Republicans. Thank you, brothers and sisters.